My name is Simbalaji Charles Kianga. Thank you very much for being a part and parcel of Metropole Televisions of Business AM for the entire of 2020 as we usher in 2021. Let's go back there and look at what has been the socio-political economic climate in the entire year, and that which we are going to speak in perspective or in respect of the BBI document that proposes major changes in that front as well. Now, the year 2020 saw 5.2 million Kenyans countrywide append their signatures in support of a referendum for the Building Bridges Initiative BBI in a week-long exercise. Now, the birth of BBI, seen as a major gain for Kenya, was the result of the much talked about handshake between former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta in March 2018. Now, the BBI report promised to address key areas in the socio-political and economic scene in Kenya that the 2010 constitution has been accused of failing to fully address. Now, the BBI report provides a 9-point framework that includes corruption, lack of national ethos, devolution, divisive elections, safety and security, responsibilities and rights, inclusivity, shared responsibility, and ethnic antagonism and competition. It now looks certain that the country will go, therefore, into a referendum come next year to decide on the fate of the BBI referendum bill a year before the country goes into the general election. That's it. Question that we're asking this morning: is the BBI the solution for Kenya? And to help us unpack that, we are joined by Philip Mangale, who is a leadership and governance consultant, and also Collins Lodge, who's been with us for the entire year, lawyer and economic analyst. Gentlemen, welcome. And I want to start with you, Philip. That's the question. We've spoken about it, and somebody's going to ask you, is it the solution for Kenya?
At the risk of sounding like a clanging cymbal, I think I will still restate what I have before.
Yes.
That while we have correctly identified our problems, we are not reaching the correct solution. Mm-hmm. And I have maintained that BBI is not the antidote to what we have identified as our problems. In fact, in a bid to tackle the issues that have been bedeviling us for a very long time, including those that were identified initially, electoral injustice, we have created avenues for even electoral injustice to thrive the more in the constitutional amendments that we have. And I must also begin by making a difference between the constitutional amendments and the BBI recommendations in the form of statutory amendments and policy recommendations. While some of those recommendations around policy and legislation are okay, in fact, some of them are very perfect. What we are trying to do with the Constitution will reverse the gains that we have made since 2010, one, and will also reverse some of those proposals that are in the policy and statutory recommendations. Yes. In the BBI report. So I do not believe that the constitutional amendments, I must make that clear, I do not believe that the constitutional amendments are the antidote to our problems. But I agree that some policy recommendations, yes, some recommendations on amending or tinkering with our statutes and our legislation are okay. I do not agree that the constitutional amendments and the referendum for that matter would solve a lot of our issues.
Pretty much, but would you say it is a step in the right direction? Would you say that? Generally?
No. Not in the right direction.
Yes.
And especially
yes,
the constitutional amendments. I
yes,
must insist, the constitutional amendments are not a step in the right direction.
Yes.
They are, in fact, steps towards the wrong direction.
Yes, I'm going to come back to that because we're going to talk about exactly what the constitution and policy proposals are. And I'm going to ask you the same question, Collins. Is it the solution that Kenya has been waiting for? And as you think about that, if it's not, or if is it a step in the right direction?
Thank you so much, Simba, for that question, and thank you for today. If you want to understand whether the BBI is a solution, then you have to understand what the BBI sought to achieve,
yes,
sought to cure. So you have to appreciate that backdrop first for us to appreciate the progress. And BBI was coming at the backdrop of where there was heavy ethnic antagonism, where people from different tribes could not visit each other, where there was boycotting of economic products. I mean, a lot of companies suffered during that time. And so the two leaders came together and had a handshake. To that extent, we appreciate what they did. But to the extent of whether that document that was produced from that agreement or that handshake is a solution to our problems, totally it's not. I think our solution to our problems is rule of law.
Yes.
Stick adherence to the rule of law. That is a solution. And just to be honest, I mean, we can pass all the relevant documents in this country. And I remember one time when the BBI document the BBI 1 was launched, I remember saying in this forum that that document was very lazy insofar as addressing our concerns or addressing our issues are concerned. BBI does not really address everything that we have. And you said that it was addressing the things that the Constitution was not addressing. We don't have any perfect Constitution anywhere. And so we understand and appreciate that Constitution is a progressive document with regards to its realization and with regards to its implementation.
Yes.
And so that was a step towards that end of just amending the Constitution and just trying to better the Constitution. But I would have admired most if we got to a position where we're saying we've tried these clauses in the Constitution and they've failed to work. For instance, the gender principle, and they say it has failed to work for us because of the wage bill, because of the inflated economy, because of all those factors. And so we sit back and realize and rather look at how we can redesign that to fit our situation. But we have failed to do that. We failed to be honest with ourselves.
Yes.
What we've done through the BBI document is to take an issue, for instance, ethnic antagonism or divisive elections, and blow it into proportion and rather massage the egos of our politicians and try to address that. The BBI is not addressing the issue of divisive elections. The divisive elections that we always had emanates from people not accepting the results of the elections.
Yes.
Because credibility of the elections have always been questioned. But we are not addressing that issue of credibility of the elections. Now we are addressing about the appointment of officials to that election commission. Now, we're having a situation whereby the election commission has really been disputed with regards to the constitution of that commission.
Yes.
But this BBI process, validation of the signatures, and even conducting that referendum is going to be done by the very, very same body that we've discredited all along. So it beats logic. But is BBI the right step towards that direction of getting it right with Kenyans? I think yes, it is. One, because I think the rate in which it has been endorsed, 5.2 million Kenyans signing it in a record of 1 week, if that is true, I mean, then that is one of the solutions. That is one of the correct strokes that we needed as a country.
Yes.
But looking at the contents of it and just engaging it logically, there are some of the clauses in there are not meant for us. Some of the clauses in there are going to hit us by the time we get to next year and we realize our economy and realize the potential of this country. And the issue is just over-representation.
Yes.
It's not what we need at this time.
Which is exactly what I wanted to get to next, because when you look at BBI, it addresses those 9 points that it's talking about, and that representation. And they say that since independence, we felt as if we are not properly represented. Is that we've given power to some communities, we've given power to some sectors of the economy more than we would have already imagined or foreseen after independence. But then, Philip, that representation clause, the way it has been addressed, and I wanted you to talk to me about that, and especially number one, the 2/3 gender rule, which we are struggling to now, to date. Another one is the representation in terms of leadership as well. Who gets to lead who, and how we achieve that? When you look at the proposals, is that the best thing that we do, or should we sort of start defining what representation could be? Do we just address representation from a leadership perspective? Because that's exactly what BBI has done.
First, I was smiling when Collins was speaking because I think that it's a stark difference from what you were sharing last time. So yes. I'm happy this morning that we are speaking the same language. Yeah, and I think these are the kinds of engagements we need to be having around these issues, logical engagements, rather than the political narratives that are thrown around by politicians. When it comes to the aspect of representation, you look at the recommendations, the proposals, the amendments that we are going to make in the Constitution.
Yes.
take an example of Parliament, for example. Now from 290, we are headed to 360.
360,
It's not just 360.
Yes.
There will be four additional members, 2 additional members representing youth, one lady and 1 gentleman, and 4 representing special interest groups.
Yes.
That brings it to 366. And then there is a rider that if you do not meet the 2/3 gender rule in that number, then you will top up seats. You will top up seats so that you meet that threshold.
2/3 number, yes.
And this, going by the way our political space is structured, it is very possible that you can have 340 men in Parliament. And that means that to address the disparity, you will need to add more, way more, for you to get to a point where
you're saying
the
that,
men
well,
are
the
not,
representation is 2/3
exactly.
of the majority.
And that
Yes.
will get us to even over 400 members of Parliament. I think that is what people do not realize, because when you are balancing, you will need to do a little bit more.
Yes.
Now, when you're tying that to gender equality, I think we are getting it wrong, because we are not addressing the root issue. One of the things around the political space and elections is political consciousness. When we are engaging in this kind of tokenism, because for me, I consider it tokenism, we are not empowering the woman, the everyday woman, in terms of political consciousness and their decision making.
Yes.
What we'll be doing in this scenario, and we have seen it in nominations, the nominations that we've had before in political parties and in other spaces, we have seen a category of women that is not the everyday women. So a few bourgeoisie women will be nominated to these positions. And yes, it might appear on the outset that we are making gains, and indeed we have made some gains. But it appears on the outset that we are making gains towards, gender equality. But what we are doing is we are only giving access to a few women.
Yes.
So we should have tackled the issue of political consciousness, and in my view, I think there are 3 steps to handling, that gender equation. One, you must empower the woman, and it's just both genders. But in this case, now that women have been disenfranchised for a long time, we must empower them. 2, you must grant them access,
yes,
and it must be meaningful access. And then after that, you must make sure that that access is obtaining impact.
Yes.
So if we go to the bit of access and we forget empowerment, then as these recommendations are proposing that after a few years, then we will do away with that kind of affirmative action, we'll get to the same place where now the everyday woman is left stranded because only a few have benefited from this kind of arrangement. Back to representation. It's not just about who gets, how many people get into Parliament. The net effect it will have on our economy, because we pay our parliamentarians too much money. In fact, I think across the continent and across the world, they're amongst the best paid. And you can imagine what that does on our expenditure.
Yes.
The amount of parliament that, the amount of money that we lose through parliament. I'm saying lose because it is not justifiable to pay these people these kinds of money. There was a time a member of parliament from South Africa came visiting his counterpart here in Kenya. And he went back and he commented, he was very surprised that his counterpart here has a vehicle, has a driver, has bodyguards, yes,
well.
and he's driven around. He has, a house that, it's very strange to have those kinds of perks in a country like South Africa. So I think we elect these people into office and we pay them too much, such that they are protected from us. That is the point we should understand.
Yes.
So these additional seats, I think this is a big mistake that if we pass these amendments, and I agree with Collins, we are going to pay dearly.
Isn't it? And are you therefore saying, and let me just cross over to Collins therefore. And Collins, I want to put the same question to you. For you, do you think that the best way to address representation, we could have got a different meaning? Is it that Kenyans want to see their leaders on that seat? Is it a more ladies, want to see more ladies on those seats? Or what do we mean by proper representation? Because if at all it's going to increase the number of legislators in the houses, then would rather not take that direction, because that has been the problem so far as well.
Thank you so much for that. I don't think, I've always said that everything started and falls with leadership. I don't think we are overrepresented. The only problem that we have is that with our leaders, they are doing careers. It is about careers to them and not service delivery. So if it was about service delivery, we would not care if we had leaders in a ratio of 2 to 1. Every person has 2 leaders. We would not care if we had that. The only problem that we had is that we have greedy leaders who have placed their interest so much ahead of the interest of the people. And so with that now we have a problem. Even if even as they're proposing the amendment of Article 130 and expanding the executive, expanding the legislature, our problem is really the wage bill that we're going to incur and the greediness that we have now to satisfy. You remember the first task that the members of parliament will always rally each other together and be bipartisan is when it comes to increasing their wages. And so you imagine if we're going to have an expanded legislature, what that is going to do to us. They are saying that drawing members of the executive from the legislature is going to add the effectiveness of the executive. I don't see how that is going to happen. I mean, ineffectiveness of our leaders is not from where they are stemming from. It's not because they are pulled from political class or they are technocrats. I think when this government got into office, they made a promise that the cabinet secretaries that are going to be appointed in this government are going to be technocrats. I mean, consistently, I have called cabinet members in your show to resign. From Kiunjuri, from now I'm even calling Magoa to resign. I mean, we have a lot of people who are so ineffective in their service delivery to the people. But most importantly, you're talking about the issue of gender representation, and that is very dear to my heart. Because we've written papers about that. What I've always said is that gender representation, for us to achieve gender representation, that has to be achieved at the political parties unit. The moment you get it right at the political parties unit, then you've sorted the issue of gender representation. Don't force leaders down the throat of Kenyans. That's saying that if you're a governor, then your deputy governor ought to be a female person. I mean, that's just forcing leadership to people. The issue of affirmative action that you're having, I mean, now we are of age. Our constitution is more than 10 years. We should not be talking of affirmative action now if we've implemented the constitution fully, but we've not implemented the constitution fully. And so we'll keep piggybanking on this issue of affirmative action and just trying to see, okay, now we gave you 47 seats, let us take away those 47 seats, let us increase them now in Senate. What happens in Senate compared to what happens in Parliament? Parliament is the upper house. If you look at even the functions that have been divided to Parliament by the constitution, Parliament is the upper house. Parliament is where decision making happens in Parliament. Now you're removing women from Parliament and saying, let us take you to Senate, where Senate is called Bunge la Wazee. For you to do what? I mean, and then you're talking about progressive inclusion of gender equality. Not at all. I mean, look at all political parties in this country. And they are so dishonest when it comes to the inclusion of women. They use women actually to get votes. If you look at their party constitutions and look at the structure of leadership in those political parties, I think it's only ODM that comes close because they have, I think, an assistant secretary general who is a female person. Beyond that, you will really struggle to get female persons in those parties. Look at their party constitutions and look at if they address the issue of gender representation and the issue of women in that in the political parties. It doesn't. And so if we have to achieve political parties, if you have to achieve gender representation, make political parties to be an environment where women in themselves can grow. You've seen how, for instance, ODM has really frustrated women. People like Elizabeth Ongoro, when it came to vying, I think in Kasarani or Mathare, I think, they were heavily charged for vying in a place where another ODM member was vying. I think TJ Kajwang was equally vying in that area. And you see how she was imposed heavy fines for that. I mean, what kind of stifling democratic rights are we doing in this country? For me, my proposal is go to the political parties, make it a mandate and a requirement that a political party needs to achieve that through that gender principle, not just at the face value or in writing, but practically. After we've agreed at that point that, we need women at the boardroom, then let's go forward and talk about elective positions.
Pretty much. Now, Philip, just before you add on that, and I want you to join this as we go on a break, because that means that we only have 5 minutes left. Now, he also proposes to revive the 2010 direct linkage between the cabinet and the legislature by allowing for ministers and the deputies to be appointed from among the legislators. Remember, that's something that we already had and we moved away from. We had reasons for that. It's also saying that, well, when it comes to fighting corruption, they're going to empower the judiciary in this sense, not make the judiciary the final, but then an independent ombudsman who's going to come in and also look at the way that the judiciary is running their functions. Put that together with the fact that it's also proposing that corruption cases in this country should be listened to and dealt with in 2 years. Way forward to fighting corruption as well?
First, I was going to say that
Yes.
what Collins mentions is very true, that the political party space is a mess. And I mentioned last time that I think these are SMEs. These are not really political parties. They are owned by individuals, controlled by individuals, and in some cases, a few individuals spread across the country, and then we are told a party has a national outlook.
Yes.
That points us to one problem, that Parliament has, over time, watered down the Constitution through legislation, because Parliament is given the authority to legislate and to give effect and meaning to certain provisions of the Constitution, including the Political Parties Act.
Yes.
But continually, Parliament has failed to meet the standard of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So I think we must really lay blame where it ought to be. Parliament has failed us. When we're talking about cabinet ministers, I don't know what difference it will make if we call them ministers as opposed to cabinet secretary. It is that, for me, it's inconsequential.
Yes.
But they're insisting that we must now call them ministers. The reason why we got away from the model we had before was because we had seen ministers then balancing between being politicians, balancing between the health of their political parties and gaining political mileage, and working effectively in their ministries. So we had, in some instances, robotic ministers. So they will just be there for the political answers, rather than engaging in the running of their ministries.
Yes.
When we got to the model that we have now with cabinet secretaries, we have seen ministers working, cabinet secretaries working, and people who are aware of what is happening in their ministry. Of course, with the exception of a few individuals, and in that case, we then doubt the wisdom of the president in appointing them. But that was the reason.
Yes.
If we get back to this model that is being proposed, and I must mention, this is something that people do not realize, because the proposed amendment to Article 152, it says that one of the provisions says that the cabinet ministers may be appointed from Parliament. Now, that gives a window. I think you've heard politicians saying that, we'll have a certain number from Parliament, a certain number from the technocratic space.
Yes.
But that means that you will actually have, a president could actually decide to have all ministers from Parliament. All of them from Parliament. That, as opposed to, the county executive committee,
yes,
where one of the proposals is that there is a limited number of people that you can draw from the county assembly. So there's some mischief here that, somebody could take advantage of this and then now have all cabinet ministers coming from Parliament. And what that will do is to muddy the waters of interdependence and dependence of the arms of government, which we are trying to get away from, considering our political arena. I think it will not serve us any good if we go that way. We're also proposing to have deputy ministers. I think the political class has insisted that they really need this kind of political offices. We saw the president appointing CASs. And in my view, I do not see why we need those kinds of people. For what reason? Rather than playing the political card in these ministries. And there seems to be an urgency to maintain the political hand in the operation of the ministries. Why not retain the technocrats that we've had? In as much as some of them have failed, but why not retain them? So that their obligation is to the people of Kenya first, and then they can be oversighted by Parliament.
Yes.
One of the reasons that I've had members of Parliament say they support these proposals is that they are not getting to interact with cabinet secretaries in Parliament
Yes.
because they do not sit in Parliament. That is very lame. For a Parliament that has been given the mandate and the powers under this constitution, you cannot have such an argument. I mean, we've seen parliamentary committees meet cabinet secretaries, and they engage in chit-chat that does not achieve any results. We've seen a parliament that has consistently played to the tune of the office of the president and
Yes.
the executive for that matter.
Yes.
So if we get to that place now, and we'll be reverting to it, where the executive is fully in control of what happens in Parliament, because anyway, the President appoints the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is the leader of government business in Parliament and whatnot, you would have no distinction completely.
Yes.
And that is why I'm saying we are reversing the gains of the 2010 Constitution.
Pretty
we
much.
must have some sense, in as much as we'll be having committee between the executive and legislature,
Yes.
we must have some sense of independence so that Parliament can really oversight the executive when it chooses to.
Yes. Philip, I'm going to have to take a break here because, Collins, I want to respond to that second part of it. That independent ombudsman who's going to come in and then oversight the judiciary, and also the corruption cases in this country that we are now going to see, according to BBI, get completed in just 2 years. Is that the magic bullet that Kenyans have been waiting for when it comes to the judicial system in this country? Once we come from this break with Collins on Watch.